Welcome to Intention Podcast. This is Byron DeLear. We've got a great guest today for our 7th episode, an election special, and it's someone I know really, really well. My wife, Vicki Englund, who is running for Missouri State Treasurer, and we're just 1 week away from the election. Wow, it's been a long haul.
Yes, it has, definitely. Thanks for inviting me, Byron.
Sure. So this is you and I on a podcast, like we're a married couple and we're doing a podcast, and this is, really a contribution to the 21st century portfolio of media.
Absolutely.
So, I'm thinking about when we met in 2007 at a candidate reception for the House Democratic Campaign Committee. I was running for Congress in the 2nd Congressional District in the St. Louis area, and you were running for state representative in South County. And we talked about Gore Vidal, the inimitable Gore Vidal, a famous political commentator, author, activist. And little did I realize at the time, but, fast forward to 2019, you and I would be sitting together at the Democratic Party's Truman Dinner with our little 3-month-old baby boy, Walker.
Yeah, it seems pretty incredible. We weren't just talking about Gore Vidal for randomness, but you had asked me why on earth I was getting into politics. And I said, well, when I was younger, a boy in my 8th grade class told me a girl couldn't be president. And I watched a mini series by Gore Vidal called Gore Vidal's Lincoln. And that's what inspired me to get into politics. And then right after I said that to you, you said, oh, well, I know Gore Vidal. He's a friend of mine. That just blew me away. That wasn't what I had expected you would say. But yes, that was many years ago, a different time for sure.
Yeah, Gore had supported me in my run for Congress, and we co-hosted a fundraiser together. And it was quite something. He had reviewed some writings of mine, and I have, a whole slew of amazing stories about Gore Vidal. But, we can save that for later, because I really wanted to focus on this last, you're on the 5-yard line. You're trying to get in the end zone, to use the ubiquitous sports analogy here.
Yes.
We've got 1 week to go in the campaign. I've sort of looking at this political field of play right now, it seems like the biggest barrier to politics right now is about the parties, and about how, say, for example, Missouri has been tracking red for some time, meaning voting Republican. In general, the rural areas vote heavily for Republicans, while the urban areas vote Democratic, with the suburbs vacillating back and forth. With this year, potentially due to huge pushback against President Trump, most likely most of the suburbs in the United States will favor Democrats. But where does this leave us? I mean, why should the average voter in the rural areas of Missouri or Missouri, the boot heel of Missouri, or Rolla, or Lebanon, or Nevada, why should they vote for you, a Democrat?
Well, we have to remember that the way you've characterized our current state of politics isn't always the way it's been in Missouri. In fact, what we're going through right now is an aberration. So until 2002, the Democratic Party had been in the majority in the House and the Senate for over 40 years. It wasn't until the term limits were passed and kicked in 2002 when the Democrats lost the majority. So for years, for the majority of our political years, Democrats represented rural areas, and they did so fine and great. And in thinking about whether or not to run for office, I remembered back to when I was first elected in 2008, and Democrats were 8 seats in the minority. And so I served with a lot of rural Democrats, a lot of people who were moderate to conservative in their political views, but were still Democrats. And the people that voted those folks in are still out in Missouri. They're still there. And so part of my campaign this time was to try to figure out exactly what you're talking about. Why and how did the Democratic Party lose our base throughout the state? And so there's a few things I could add to that discussion. One, we have changed the way politics is done because of term limits. There's always a focus on which House seats and which Senate seats are being termed out. You have people elected to office that are not in for as many years as they used to be. But you also obviously have a bigger focus on money and gerrymandering and the way districts have been drawn. But overall, I think when we talk about the Democratic Party in Missouri and we talk about the Democratic Party in other parts of our country, it's become very much more difficult to be a Democrat and have moderate to conservative viewpoints on Democratic issues. And that's something I've tried to remedy in my campaign, as far as having a big tent, being able to talk to rural Missourians and let them know that the Democratic Party in rural Missouri can still represent their interests.
So let's talk about some of those core values. We have a two-party system here in America, in Missouri. Certainly there are third political parties, and I've had a wealth of experience working with one of the third political parties before in my past as a candidate. And, if you have any aspirations towards being able to cast a vote in the legislature to advance your community's values and issues, you're generally going to have to either join one of two parties. You're either going to be a Republican or you're going to be a Democrat.
Right.
And, obviously we've seen some polarization that's occurred in the last decade, where the fringes of both political parties have become more vocal or more influential, because if it bleeds, it leads, right? The more sensational and, aggressive viewpoints that you can carry in the news media, those skids get greased with those kind of messaging.
Right.
And so the moderate view, or the view towards compromise, the negotiation of being able to arrive at consensus between, center left, center right, that really isn't as sexy. That doesn't really get the play like it should, because that's really where the art of governing happens, right?
And I think that's alienating people. I think that's exactly right. It's not exciting, but it also means we get a lot less done. And I think people are tired of things not getting done and just politicians screaming at each other.
So, politics have become so fractious. It's so much about scoring points, or when you listen to MSNBC or CNN or Fox News, it's about dragging your opponent down. And these are campaign strategies. Everybody's accustomed to seeing the negative ads that we see at the end of an election cycle. The news, the channels are just inundated with just these crazy ads with crazy graphics and dark music, and everything's going to hell in a handbasket.
Right.
So, you depict a situation politically in cartoonish terms, and then you straw man your way to victory, meaning you mischaracterize the opposition. And this is through political commercials, through mail advertisements. You mischaracterize the opposition by vilifying or demonizing it. And then, well, of course you shouldn't vote for Satan, right? It seems this is the standard and rather boring political technique. But it seems that these, political campaign techniques have infected the entire population now. Everyone is vilifying, not just the operatives. And politics, for many years now, has just become like a form of entertainment sports.
Right. I think what you're talking about has really reached its height, starting with the election of Donald Trump. If you elect someone who's by trade is an entertainer, a reality TV show host, of course you're going to get that kind of tension and release situation. You're going to get the entertainment vibe. And that's not how you govern. And all the time when you see these ads, like you're talking about, the negative ad with the dark music and, making a candidate, look like they're the devil or something, that's not how you govern. And at the end of the day, you have to work with the other side, especially in Missouri.
So how do you govern?
Well, we have to really take a look at how many people that are elected are elected with the goal of governing. Because with term limits, we have folks that are in there for just a few years. They're specifically not trying to be people who are knowledgeable about public policy. And the kind of systemic changes we need to make to a lot of our situations and challenges in Missouri, you have to get into the policy of it. I got interested in politics also because I'm a policy wonk. Like, I see a problem and want to dig into the policy to change it. And unless you have allies in the legislature or in statewide government in order to accomplish those things, it's really difficult. I mean, it can be done. I've passed bills being a member of the minority before. I plan to do a lot of things as state treasurer that will involve the legislature at some point or another. And I think by framing the discussion with someone on the other side as we are working for Missourians to solve problems, I mean, it sounds naive, but at the end of the day, that's really what governing is all about. It's trying to solve problems that exist, not creating new ones to talk about in a political ad.
So what are you going to do as treasurer? What kind of policies are going to impact Missourians' lives and make their lives better?
So I have on my website at vickyenglund.com 100 new ideas to get Missouri's economy back on track.
100?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are ideas, right? There are a variety of things, some things, and I introduce a new one every day for the last 100 days of the campaign. So there are ideas that aren't specific just to the treasurer's office. I mean, several of them are, like bringing the treasurer's unclaimed property auctions online. We can save taxpayer dollars. I've been operating my online small business for the last 20 plus years. So that is my key thing that I do well, is to sell things online. I want to train small business owners how to bring their businesses online. I mean, even before COVID, these were some of the ideas I had to try to support small businesses. And, my work with the Clinton administration at the SBA really taught me how to work and how to focus on minority and women-owned businesses. And with COVID, we've got a whole different situation ahead of us. We need to provide assistance to the smallest of small businesses, the ones that typically haven't qualified for PPP or may have found out about CARES Act funding too late before it all got used up. And another thing I found is that there's a lack of diversity in the treasurer's office, and therefore there aren't a lot of outreach mechanisms in place to reach out to the minority business community or minority farmers. And we really need to make sure that when we are building back our economy, to quote our next president, that we're building back better. And I intend to do that as Missouri State Treasurer.
So, this podcast is called Intention. And, I began recording it during the pandemic, the shutdown. We were exploring the experiences that different people were having, the suffering that people were going through economically, what it meant to be an essential worker. But just going back to the title of the podcast, what is your intention? What's your primary motivator for public service?
I think the primary motivation for me started in my childhood. I'm the first in my family to go to college. So my dad was a welder, my mom worked in retail. And not having that ability to move ahead due to lack of college degree or lack of a profession, it really held our family back. And my dad was unemployed for most of my childhood. And he taught me how important it was to work hard. And so I wanted to take the education that I was lucky enough to have. I have a bachelor's degree and master's degree in political science from the American University in Washington, D.C. And I wanted to bring that knowledge back home to St. Louis and work hard for families who were in a similar situation that my family was in during the 1980s. So for me, it's about helping other people because I'm very lucky with the education and a lot of opportunities that I had. And so one way of doing that is through small business creation, small business growth, and helping people realize that their dream of whatever it is that they like to do can become a way to provide more for their families.
And if I'm a Republican that's living in, outstate Missouri, rural Missouri, and I want to vote for Donald Trump, Why should I vote for you as a Democrat for state treasurer?
Well, I'm a former state legislator from South St. Louis County. And for those of you not familiar with that area, it's a very moderate to conservative place. I was first elected back in 2008. The Republican woman that I beat me in 2010. I beat her in 2012. She beat me in 2014. And I came about 400 votes shy of winning in 2016. Now, during that time, I also served on the Lindbergh School Board for 6 years, the last couple of years as its treasurer. So my experience being a representative is that I've only represented conservative areas. And I'm a hard worker. You can tell by my ability to keep going and keep working hard that it's something I'm very passionate about. And so my experience, not only representing people with moderate to conservative issues, I've also been through something similar to what we're going through right now with our economy. When I moved back from Washington, D.C., I started working for the St. Louis County Economic Council. And my job was to create relationships between St. Louis County and the unincorporated parts of South County. So it's basically creating business relationships with people who don't like government, because that's one of the main reasons why South St. Louis County is unincorporated. They don't want that extra level of government. And so the level of government they need to interact with is St. Louis County, which is not in South County. And so as a result of that work, I was there before, during, and after 9/11. And while it's not exactly what we're going through now with our economy and with our struggling small businesses, it's very different than the experience that my opponent has. So I have worked with small businesses who were trying to stay open, trying to reinvent their businesses. How could they do something different? How could they get through 9/11? And if you remember at the time, the attacks happened obviously on September 11th, but at that point in time, we did not know if there was more to come. You know, the airlines were down for a while. The stock market crashed. There was a lot of problems going on right then. And it was more of the unknown. And so fast forward to me being a state rep, elected as a state rep in 2008. And I'm serving the legislature when we have the Great Recession, right? And the housing market crashes. And so my professional experience has put me in situations where I've been able to help small businesses get out of those situations. And so for a conservative Republican who wants to vote for Donald Trump, I would ask them to consider me because I've got that experience of working hard to get our small businesses back on track.
And is there an argument for bringing balance to Jefferson City and having a wider range of voices and opinions as opposed to just sort of like one party rule? Is there an argument for that? That, in other words, the entire state, whether you are a Republican or a Democrat, will benefit from having a broader palette of voices and opinions in Jefferson City. Is that true?
It is true. However, I would say that if you are a Republican living in rural Missouri and you are a Donald Trump supporter, you may or may not be someone who's followed politics for a long time to know that that's really of a benefit to the state. I mean, I think it's a fair thing to say, and I would most likely say it to people as well. But, you know, Donald Trump has also brought out a different kind of voter that has not typically voted very much in the past, who typically is just all about Donald Trump. So we have to balance that experience as well.
So turning the page to chapter 2 in Whiplash Political Interviews, now you are a progressive Democrat. You support Black Lives Matter. You're very much interested in universal health care and addressing climate change and, you know, passing a minimum wage, a $15 minimum wage, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, universal health care. These are the kinds of things that the Democratic Party is invested in. Why should a progressive Democrat living in Kansas City vote for you?
Well, there are always things to look at when you're talking about different issues. And as treasurer, you know, my main focus is to get the economy back on track, right? So when you look at something like Medicaid expansion, you know, we passed that in Missouri in August of this year. And Medicaid expansion is not only the right thing to do for healthcare, but it's even more important when it comes to building back the economy. Look, expanding Medicaid will create at least 16,000 good paying jobs in our state. And we cannot expect workers to go to work safe and healthy if they don't have health care. And so this is part of an overall plan to bring Missouri into the 21st century. So
Missouri Forward?
MissouriForward.com. Absolutely. Good weave in there.
Yeah, well,
And likewise, when you're looking at sustainability and you're looking at creating new jobs, the opportunities for job creation in the solar industry, in the wind industry, in any kind of sustainable industry, that's the future. And in Missouri, we're really good at making stuff. And we need good, strong union jobs now more than ever. And so using the sustainability and the green jobs mantra as a way to build our state and build those jobs, it accomplishes more than one goal. And those are the types of things that I have put in my 100 new ideas. Usually there are things that if we do green jobs, for example, that's going to be more than just one improvement to our state. It's going to, as you like to say, the triple bottom line, right? It's going to save money on people's utility bills. We're going to save the planet, and we're going to create jobs.
Who's the biggest employer in Missouri? It's Walmart, isn't it?
It is one of the biggest employers, yes, and that's a problem.
You bring up labor, and I think about how Walmart in Germany, for example, allows their workers to unionize, but Walmart here doesn't allow that. And, the larger topic of labor to me, it's kind of really easy to see from the 50,000 foot viewpoint, which is labor has been responsible for 40-hour work weeks, for safety in the workplace, for driving the abolition of children working in the workplace over the years. I mean, so many things have come from labor. Labor built the middle class. And yet it's been getting the short end of the stick for year after year after year in a compound sense. The percentage of the workforce is smaller that are associated with labor. So in terms of some broad stroke changes, it seems really evident, I think, to the majority of Missourians that labor is a good thing and it needs to be supported. And, that may sound a little one-sided. I mean, especially if all you do is watch Fox News and labor gets hammered left and right. But look at what happened when Right to Work went to the entire state for a vote, where Right to Work is an anti-labor policy initiative that legislators have been attempting to foist onto the Missourian economy for many, many years. And it finally went to a statewide referendum, and it was rejected 70% or something like that, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was 2-1.
Yeah, so, I mean, you have this obvious example where this single issue was placed before the people of Missouri, and they went, yeah, we support Missouri's working families.
Well, and not only that, but when you brought up Walmart, this is a little known fact that a lot of people don't know about the treasurer's office. So the main job of the treasurer is to be the CFO of the state, or the chief financial officer. And that includes investing your taxpayer dollars. So before the legislature and the governor can spend the money, the treasurer invests it. And right now, I don't know if you even know this, Byron, your taxpayer dollars are being invested in Walmart through the treasurer's office.
Oh, I know. I've been following your campaign.
Right. And, the last time we had a Democratic treasurer was Clinton's wife, and he did not do that. So not only are your taxpayer dollars going to Walmart, but whenever Walmart hires someone, because they don't pay a living wage, those people then apply for assistance through Missouri Social Services. And so it's a double whammy. It's like we're investing in a company, and the better they do, the more people they hire, and then the more people we have to put on the welfare rolls here in Missouri. So it's a lose-lose. And that's not a good way to do business. I don't care what your party is.
And so you have support of labor, do you not?
I have very much support of labor, and I also have the support of the National Democratic Treasurers Association. They have targeted my race as one of the top 3 pickups in the United States this year, and they have a lot of labor supporting their organization as well.
So women need to be in more positions of power.
I'm glad you know that. It's a good thing for my husband to know.
Gender equity, right?
Yes.
What happens when power in society is more equitably distributed?
Well, you get more viewpoints. And the perfect example of that is when I was first elected, my two older children at the time were 3 and 5 years old. And we were on the floor of the House debating the Parents as Teachers program. And the people I was debating with were older than me. They didn't have young children like I did, and they didn't really understand what the program was. They thought it was how to change diapers, those kinds of things. Parents as Teachers program is actually was born in Missouri. The rest of the country uses it as a model. Not only does it test the motor skills and the fine motor skills of children as they're developing, what their language is like, but it can also detect autism spectrum disorders at a very early age, even early enough to start being able to help that child with the issues that they might have. So this is a super important program. We're debating this on the floor. And my children were actually still enrolled in Parents as Teachers at the time I was debating this. And I explained to people exactly what the program was about. And as a result, I was able to save $1 million for the program. So that's the kind of thing you need. You need to have women, you need to have people of color in the legislature and even in the treasurer's office, because if you don't have a variety of people making decisions, they're not going to be able to have decisions made about the variety of people that are affected by those decisions. It's much more prevalent in other states than it is here in Missouri, but we are working hard to change that.
What's more prevalent?
Having different colored faces and different people in the hallways of power making these important decisions.
I think about what it would be like if you were to prevail in your election and win the state treasurer's office, win that seat. What are you going to do about equity and inclusion with regard to how that office is run in terms of expanding, the family of Missouri, expanding these opportunities in government now? You'll be a government representative. You'll be in a statewide seat. And I would think that, having a forward-thinking outlook towards inclusion as the arc of history bends slowly towards including more and more people from our founding. When America was founded, only white men that owned land were voters.
Right.
But that has been expanded over the years, and we're constantly trying to stretch the bounds of the art of what's possible in our country so that the constitutional principles don't just apply to American citizens. They should apply to everyone, or they mean nothing, as Captain Kirk said in a famous Star Trek episode.
Absolutely.
But what would you do? What would you do with your office towards inclusion?
Well, to start with the office itself, there are about 45 people who are employed there. And of those 45, it's my understanding there are 2 Hispanic people and 1 African American. And that is not what the state of Missouri looks like. So I mentioned a lot of the different ideas that I have for doing new things with the treasurer's office that are centered around small businesses. And I think it's about time the treasurer's office had an internship program, especially because we're so lucky in Jefferson City to have an HBCU of Lincoln University right there. So my goal is to bring Lincoln University students into the treasurer's office to have internships. I mean, I had interns when I was in the Capitol. There are lots of interned programs that are available that just aren't in the treasurer's office. And so bringing students in, having them help us modernize the office by searching for the owners of unclaimed property through social media, for example, instead of just publishing thousands of names in 2-point font in the newspaper a couple times a year. But being proactive to return money back to people, also putting the unclaimed property auctions online, and then teaching the students about finance and about the other things that the treasurer's office does, especially the 529 college savings accounts that not a lot of people know about, the Mo-Able accounts, which are accounts for persons with disabilities. So getting the wealth of information and the wealth of services that the treasurer's office provides out to communities who are not typically aware of the kinds of things that the treasurer's office can do.
I'd like to double back to what we were discussing earlier about the need to elevate the profile of the moderate, or rather somebody that's interested in more the machinery of governing. And the machinery of governing is driven by building coalitions. And if you're going to be, having an impact on large issues, those coalitions have to cross party lines. So I sometimes think that the word moderate does a disservice to, what the real politique of the situation is, which is actually getting things done, moving
Right.
things forward, compromising. Where is the common ground shared by Democrats and Republicans that can be codified into law? And, we can create a scenario where ownership is taken by leaders from both parties so that it isn't perceived as a political scoring contest and you're defeating your opponent because you've achieved something. I mean, I remember when Barack Obama was elected after he lost Missouri by 3,000 votes, very close race. But Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, came out and said, our goal is to basically make sure that he doesn't get anything done. and
Right.
and that to me is, we need to get past that. So I've been having conversations with elected Republicans in the state of Missouri. I respect these guys and gals, and I've been talking to them about what is a conversation going to look like where we can think as Americans again, as opposed to the appendages of some warped political campaign operation, because that's really what has infiltrated the entire populace now. It would be like, say the St. Louis Cardinals did something somewhat untoward, maybe they broke a rule or something like this. And then all of a sudden, would you see the whole entire population of St. Louis becoming Cubs fans?
Well,
The Chicago Cubs? It would never happen. But I mean, I think too often we're putting on our blue and red hats and we're thinking of it like the home team.
right.
And so there's nothing ever that the home team could do that would make us kick them out. I mean, if you look at the laundry list, I mean, I'm going to get a little partisan here for the Republican listeners, but if you look at the laundry list of the stuff that has occurred under the Trump administration, it's a list that's so huge in terms of violating norms, going against our allies, telling mistruths, misrepresenting things like this, trying to divide the American people. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. And yet, there are so many people that have just locked in, and that's their home team. They're going to support them no matter what. So how do we begin to break that down and start to build a conversation of Americans trying to serve America and not have it be this, this dance of denigration?
I think the treasurer's office actually lends itself to moving in that direction that you're talking about, because the treasurer handles the money, right? And money, the income to the state, is typically something both parties want. They want to make sure the state has enough income to cover its expenditures. Typically, the disagreements come on the spending side. Ultimately, I believe that Democrats and Republicans want the same things. They want kids to have a good education. They want there to be jobs that are secure and good paying jobs. They want people to be able to be self-sufficient and take care of themselves and their families. And they want people to be treated with respect regardless of their color or who they love. I think we just disagree on how to get there. But with the treasurer's office, you're talking about small business loans. You're talking about more jobs. You're talking about ways to bring more people to a place of wealth and prosperity. And now that we are living through COVID, we want to bring more people to a healthy place. And so when you're looking at those decisions from a statewide perspective, especially a state like Missouri, you have to take in all of the areas. You can't just put on your red glasses or your blue glasses and only see those parts of the state that voted for you, for example. And I think, Joe Biden talks about that a lot when he talks about whether you voted for me or not, I'm going to represent you. And that's how I served when I was a state legislator. I knew I represented a more conservative to moderate part of Missouri, and I wanted to represent. But at the same time, you can lead toward a better future for everybody. You can lead toward new ideas. And so that's where I think the opportunity is. It's focusing on how do we get to that new economically secure place for everybody in the state. And the treasurer's office doesn't have the same political pitfalls as, say, the governor's office or even the lieutenant governor's office or even the attorney general's office when you look at it.
So we're a week out from the election. How weird has it been for you to campaign during the COVID pandemic? Ever thought you'd be giving speeches at a drive-in?
No, and I definitely did not think I'd be having events over the internet and speaking to anywhere from 2 to 100 people at any given time, depending on how many people are on that Zoom call. So, it's been interesting. I think we have learned a lot as far as how to communicate with people. I think when you are talking to people who aren't usually as tech savvy as we need them to be, now people are learning more skills. They're learning how to do Zoom. They're learning how to contribute online. They're learning how to do things as we're all learning ways to reinvent our whole lives. There's not really any part of our lives that wasn't affected by COVID-19. And this is just another, when I talk to people on the phone, if they're an attorney's office, I'll ask, well, are you guys open for business or are you doing everything online? And if they don't have anything to do with the courts, they're usually doing pretty well. But since the courts are shut down, depending on where you live, that can impact an attorney's office. You talk to my friends in labor, if they are working for the UFCW and they are grocery store employees, they've had a much different experience than the guys who drive the trains all around the state. So it's really getting and talking to people about their lives. And that is something that's a little bit different this time around running for office. You have more people that are willing to share their concerns, willing to share their fears. You hear about people who have lost loved ones due to COVID-19, and it helps you really put things into perspective, both on, all right, I'm doing a phone call, someone tells me their mother just got sick with COVID-19. Is this the time to ask them for money? Probably not.
Yeah.
But it is the time to put into perspective why you're fighting so hard. We have, unfortunately, 2 political parties in Missouri who do not agree on face masks, for example. And that's the most simple way to keep people safe. And we can't even agree on that. And so we have to make sure we get people elected statewide who understand what we have to do to protect Missourians. And you cannot get your economy back on track unless you have people that are safe and feel safe going out and spending their money at small businesses, at movie theaters, at restaurants, different events. And that's the part that I think makes it difficult. But everything I do, even though I'm sitting in my basement for most of it, this time around, it just gives you that much more reason to keep pushing forward to get elected, because there's so much work to do. So much.
I've heard that a lot of campaigns are being won out of basements these days. At least if you listen to the critics of Joe Biden,
Right.
That's all he does is sit in his basement, and he's just running away with the whole election.
Right.
I remember back in March, Vicki, when COVID began to hit and the stay-at-home orders happened, and the protective gear that hospitals had were running out. And the first thing that you did was you got out your sewing machine and you started sewing masks.
Mm-hmm.
And you got a few friends and colleagues to help you sew masks. You started delivering masks to different communities that were in need, including, retirement homes
Mm-hmm.
and some medical centers. Mm-hmm. And you started giving masks to candidates and to constituents and things like
Mm-hmm.
this. And could you talk a little bit about that? Because, that was such a proactive way to just do what you could in the moment of crisis. And you've kind of made it a part of your campaign.
Yeah, and it was interesting, when that first all happened, and you and I were watching Rachel Maddow, and there was a story about this hospital in Indiana that was doing a video showing you how easy it was to make these masks. Now, I'm not a seamstress by any stretch. I can sew in a straight line. That's kind of how I've made the other items that I've made. And so I got my sewing machine out, and I had a lot of fabric, and, I had a couple Sound of Music moments, not quite ripping the curtains off the windows, but we had some bed sheets that I used because you needed it to be cotton. And I wanted to make sure people were safe. And it broke my heart to know that this was such an easy thing that I could do because I had the materials. And that was before you could just go to the store and buy masks. It was before they were readily available. And so I made some because I didn't want my legislator friends who were going to Jefferson City to not be protected. And I didn't want my campaign workers to not be protected. I didn't want my mother and my grandmother to not be protected.
Right.
And, we gave them to senior citizen homes and we sent them all around the state because every part of the state reacted differently to this crisis. And then I just kept making them. None of us really know when this is going to be over. We don't. And this is something that I can do. And because I wasn't spending as much time door knocking as I would have if we were able to be out and about during this time, I felt like that time was time well spent. And so I was able to give a little bit of myself to people, do something positive to help the community. And, we're up to, I think, about 1,500 that I've personally made masks. That's one of the things I need to do is update my map and show where we've been sending all of these. But it also, Byron, it was really a lesson for our kids too. I have a teenage daughter who's 17, teenage son who's 14, and then our little boy Walker who's 17 months. And, my kids would just see me sewing and sewing and sewing. And I wanted them to understand that when there's a crisis and you can do something to help, you do it. And that I think is just part of my willingness to lend my talents wherever I can.
It's part of who you are, and it's part of the woman I love.
I love you too, babe.
And the masks, are, I think it's just indicative of your commitment to public service. And I think that right motives can never be penalized.
Right.
And at your kickoff event at Cafe Napoli, I mentioned that you have a commitment to public service and that's what's really on your heart. And I think that that's why Missourians should vote for you for state treasurer. And, what do you think 2021 is going to bring for the United States? I mean, 2020 for Missouri, for America, it's been a tough road to hoe for sure. What do you see on the horizon? What is making you feel positive?
I'm hopeful that once we get this election behind us, right, it will be less of a distraction when it comes to the realization that COVID-19 is actually a threat to everyone's lives. I mean, it's very easy right now to turn on the TV and hear politicians talking about how it's not a thing, or you're overreacting, or it's going to go away. And I think we just need to get to a place where clearer heads will prevail. And once the election is over, the people will have spoken as to whom they want to lead. And if they choose people, which I'm sure they will, when they choose people who have a plan for moving forward, those are the people that will be able to implement those plans.
Do you have any concluding thoughts now that we're a week away from the election and this is your first statewide campaign, Vicki? You've served in the legislature as a legislator. You've gotten amendments passed. You've gotten some good bills passed. And now that you have elevated your ambition to run statewide, what is it that you want to say to conclude this podcast?
Well, I think I'm handling it a lot better than I thought I would because this is my 10th competitive election. And like anything else, the experience that you have from the first time you've done something definitely is of value. And I've learned so much through this process. I have a great team that I've put together. In the past, I've relied more on myself to do everything. I have a team. I have a lot of people counting on me, and I feel that we are on the edge of doing something really great for our state. I'm excited to be on a statewide ticket that's so diverse, and people are so more excited this time. They're so much more excited than I've seen in the past. And that enthusiasm is not something you can buy. That enthusiasm from voters has to be there to help keep you pushing through. And of course, I have found my perfect partner in life 4 years ago, Byron, when you and I got married a couple days after the election, and your support and your faith in me keeps me going as well.
I couldn't think of anything better to do. Thank you for listening to Intention. This podcast can be found where podcasts reside. Please subscribe, and we'll be talking again soon.